I mean, Helen has thoroughly outclassed me with her shirt choice today. But in a strange way, when you think about it, we've covered both bases, right? Because these are the two sparring influences that emerged from the late 50s, early
Yeah,
60s, right?
that's
So you
right.
had that sort of nihilistic
That's right.
mania, right? That
Yeah,
that spy versus spy satirized, and then you have NASA, the
that's so funny. Just those sort of,
culture of
Utopia.
curiosity and exploration and uh, knowledge for its own sake, all of that. Yeah, so
I love that. And you guys didn't coordinate this. Oh, wonderful. Welcome everybody. We're just hanging out here until the event's going to begin. Welcome to Book Passage. We're excited to introduce you to Paraic and Helen in just a minute. We're just going to let everybody sign in first before we start.
I'm just listening to my parrot eating his dinner. There's sort of small clicking noises as he shells some. The parrot may make an appearance if he starts to get needy. So apologies in advance for that.
Oh, no apologies. I think you should encourage that.
I was doing a talk a while ago, and in the talk at one point, for some reason, the topic turned to angels. And the parrot was sitting on top of the door, other side of the room. And as I said the word angel, he flew down and landed on my head.
Oh,
and
no.
afterwards, the organizers were like, was it a signal?
you can't script that stuff.
Yeah, it was good though.
Oh, that's so funny. We had chickens for a while. They were a lot of fun. A big mess, but a lot of fun. Yeah. Yeah.
At home, you mean? Not in the store.
Not in the store.
Not in the store. I would have been hysterical in the store watching them chase people. That would have been very funny. Yes, but it's very difficult to train them not to go to the bathroom places. So it would have been a bit of a mess.
I had a landlady who had these Polish chickens. I don't know if you've seen them. They've basically got this kind of huge crown of feathers.
Yes, we had two of those.
Right, like a pom-pom.
They're adorable. Yes.
She had all these chickens, and they were all kind of a little bit flighty, but the Polish chickens were really tame. And I said to her, like, how come the Polish chickens are so tame? And she just laughed at me. She picked one up, and she lifted its feathers, and it went. I couldn't see it.
That's so funny. The Polish are very sweet. They're very, very sweet, actually.
So what have you
Welcome
got?
everybody. We're just letting everybody sign in. We're going to give it another minute, and then we're going to start our wonderful event. So thank you for coming and joining us.
I will continue this conversation about chickens because I'm such a bird nerd. So what chickens have you got? You've got Polish. What else have you got?
Oh my God. I no longer. I actually had to the fight between the birds and the dogs. I'm afraid the dogs won. Yeah. So we've just like a few months ago had to get rid of all of our chickens. So I don't have any anymore. But we had 5, 6 chickens. They were wonderful. They're really sweet, and they love to be held. It was sort of a surprise. And yeah.
Did you name them, Louisa, your chickens?
Yes. Well, my daughters named the chickens. Absolutely.
As it should be.
As it should be. And they were very funny because they didn't love laying their eggs in the nesting area. They would lay them around the garden. We call them yard eggs that we would find for other places. Anyway,
which sounds like a euphemism.
It does.
It does sound like
I have to admit, I was surprised that I was not excited to eat the eggs if they weren't in the place that I was expecting them. Like when I found them other places, I always felt a little bit like, ooh, I'm not sure I want that egg. You know, like how long has that been sitting there in the dirt?
Just means it has organic and locally sourced bona fides, right?
It means
should have stuff clinging to it.
I'm more picky than I thought, is what it meant.
Keep chickens, learn things about yourself. I have a friend who's got a chicken called Gwyneth Poultry, which gives me perpetual
pleasure. I love that. All my chickens had sort of old lady names. I don't know why. Chickens always make me think of little old ladies. Okay, enough of the chickens. I think we are ready to actually start this fabulous event. Thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm Louisa Smith. I'm the buyer for Book Passage, which means that I have the best job in the entire world and that I get to read all these wonderful books. And one of the ones I most got excited about this year is The House on Vesper Sands. It's deliciously dark and suspenseful, and you would be hard pressed to find anything more delightful than this book. So let me set the scene. London, 1893. High up in a house on a dark, snowy night, a lone seamstress stands by a window. So begins the swirling, serpentine world of Paraic O'Donnell's Victorian-inspired mystery, the story of a city cloaked in shadow but burning with questions. Why does the seamstress jump from the window? And how is she connected to a rash of missing girls, all of whom seem to disappear under similar circumstances? On the case is Inspector Cutter, a detective as sharp as he is wryly hilarious. Gideon Bliss, a Cambridge dropout in love with one of the missing girls, stumbles into the role as Cutter's sidekick, and clever young journalist Octavia Hillingdon sees a case as a chance to tell a story that matters, despite her employer's preference for sticking to Women's Society column. As Inspector Cutter peels back the mystery layer by layer, he leads them all, at last, to the secrets that lie hidden at the house at Vesper Sands. Paraic O'Donnell is the author of The Maker of Swans, which was shortlisted for the Bord Gais Energy Irish Book Awards in the Newcomer of the Year category. His latest book, The House in Vesper Sands, was a Guardian and Observer Book of the Year in 2018. And Helen Macdonald is a writer and naturalist best known for her memoir, H is for Hawk, and her latest collection of essays, Vesper's Flights. Helen called The House in Vesper Sands haunting and fantastically enjoyable. And I know we are in for a fantastically enjoyable event today with these two. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome, Helen and Paraic.
It is our great pleasure. Thank you so much for having us, and thanks to everyone who's joined.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a real treat, so thank you. And really, I have been looking forward to this an awful lot, so hooray. And I have just had a coffee. It's 8 p.m. and I've had a coffee, so I might be a little bit voluble. Apologies for that. So I want to just say, Paraic, you know, when I first heard about Vesper Sands, my first response, my first thought, of course, was bloody hell, he's stolen one of my words from my title. But it's you, so that was fine. Anyone else would have been, you know, it would have been very stressful, but it was you, so I was happy with that. And then I got
there first anyway, right?
Huh?
I think I got there first anyway.
You got there first, yeah. But I had it in my head. You totally won. So then I got hold of an advanced reader's copy, and basically I read it, and it did all those things that book blurbs say that happen when you read a book that never happened, and actually did them. I really did laugh, and I did cry, and I was very chilled. And anyone who's watching this who hasn't read it yet, you have such a treat in store. I'm incredibly envious of you getting to read it. So Paraic, I just want to start with, we go back to the dim and distant past, when I first discovered your existence, which was, of course, on Twitter.
Yes.
And I think the first thing that grabbed me, the first thing that I really saw of yours that still creases me up completely, was your biographies of various imaginary Mitford sisters. Now, anyone who's watching this who doesn't know about the Mitfords, they were the, you know, celebrated, scandalous kind of society, 6 of them. And I've got a little list here that Ben McIntyre described them as Diana the fascist, Jessica the communist, Unity the Hitler lover, Nancy the novelist, Deborah the duchess, and Pamela the unobtrusive poultry connoisseur. So tell us about, I can read some out if you like. I've got a few here if you want me to.
Well, yeah, I mean, that might help to contextualize the full weirdness of this for people, because it is extremely weird.
I'll do 3. I've got Scarcity Mitford. Though her existence was predicted by standard models, she was never observed experimentally and is now disputed. I have Temerity Mitford, claimed to have discovered a new transuranic element while mushrooming, was briefly engaged to marry a performing stoat. And Futility Mitford, you're laughing, I know. Futility Mitford devoted her life and those of several domestic servants to the development of a chocolate steam engine. So if you want to talk maybe a bit about the Mitford sisters, and then maybe tell us about the cocktail hour, which was a legendary thing on Twitter.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's probably way too kind. In case it isn't obvious, and I'm sure it is to everyone watching and listening, those are drunk tweets, right? I like to think of them as relatively high caliber drug tweets, but that's what they are. There comes a certain point in the day where I just start doing what amounts to online busking, and that's where these weird tangents originate. And you know, as you've seen, I was riffing extensively on essentially one of the Mitfords, Unity, whose name happened to be an abstract noun, which provided it seemed to be, given all the background that Helen has just laid out about the Mitfords and their the remarkable ways in which they managed to uh, disgrace and distinguish themselves, I think is perhaps the best way of putting it. Because, you know, let's not forget Nancy Mitford was a tremendous novelist, and I'm a straightforward fan of at least one of Mitford's sisters, but there were also straightforward fascists in the mix. So there's a lot going on there. So that's the background, and it just seemed to me that they here was an unmissable opportunity for wordplay and silliness, which is so often what we're doing on Twitter. It's sometimes relatively highbrow silliness, but it's silliness all the same. And I think first of all, it is a way of escaping from. I mean, Twitter in those days wasn't the place that it is now. It wasn't just it wasn't just a venue for doom scrolling. It wasn't just where you went to every day in order to apprise yourself of that day's disasters. It was a place that was kind of rich in invention and caprice, for want of a better word. So there was a very different context. And in the early days, I used to spend my time continually marveling at just what you could get away with, honestly. Whether it was weird jokes, weird sort of extended puns about the Mitfords, or the other thing that you mentioned, the cocktail hour, which was how do I start? where do I start in describing that?
Kind of
So
like a short story told in tweets that tended to get
yeah,
more broke as
it
it went on, is what I remember.
exactly. So it always used to happen on Friday evenings, beginning at the cocktail hour, which on this side of the world is traditionally 6 o'clock in the evening. So I would start at 6 o'clock in the evening and often end in the small hours of the morning, and obviously becoming progressively progressively um, fuzzier in my state of mind. But I think managing to still do things like punctuation and appropriately laid out dialogue, most of the time at least, it had this. Someone once very kindly described it um, as Jeeves and no, it wasn't Jeeves and Wooster. I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember um, um, an item of praise from 8 years ago, which is a sad thing to be doing in the first place.
No.
Anyway, Jeeves and Wooster meets John Banville, something like that. Because as the evening would go on and I would continue to imbibe, I would get more and more. I mean, I tried to keep it funny because I always feel that's a duty to entertain, but it would get more, more and more rhapsodic, and it always ended up because the unifying theme was that there was this unattainable. So that there was this female persona, that the cocktail hour was literally a character, right? So she was the unattainable, magnificently aristocratic and disdainful love interest of hapless. This person, the I in the cocktail hour was never identified. It was obviously just some transfigured version of myself, uh, hapless, hopeless, romantic, and almost perpetually drunk. So yeah, that was the cocktail hour. And again, going back to my point about Twitter and what you can or could get away with, it never ceased to amaze me how many people not just put up with that, but sort of gravitated towards it. And I think it honestly informed a lot of what I do
Right.
to this day.
Yeah.
It was a kind of it was an early iteration of an aesthetic uh, that I'm still dining out on.
No, I mean, I can completely see contiguities and commonalities between that and the books. And which is, you know, really an occasion of joy for me to recall that and where it led. So, I mean, in terms of the, you know, the first book, which everyone should also read, and I'm not going to talk so much about that today because we have this one in front of everyone. That was beautiful. Not as many laughs, but extremely rich and beautiful. I mean, for me, when I'm thinking about it, like, you know, playing with sort of fiction, the stories tend to come out of like an image or an atmosphere. I don't tend to think, let's write about like truck drivers, or there's just like a scene, of a very visual scene or an atmosphere. And I kind of wondered how you went about building the house on Vesper Sands. Was that something that you thought, I'm going to write a Victorian murder mystery, or was there a sense in which you had a feeling that there was something there that you wanted to write into, or what was the genesis of it?
I'm very like you in that way. There's never anything remotely that highly articulated at the beginning. There is always pretty much exactly what you've described, which is an initial image or sequence of images or constellation of images that persist to the point where they become ineradicable, and where, you know, the only means of getting past them is to develop them into something. And in the case of Vesper Sands, it was more or less exactly the opening chapter, which is in fact a prologue disguised as an opening chapter, because apparently people don't like prologues, so I just did one anyway and called it chapter 1. So it as Luisa mentioned at the beginning, in that opening sequence, we encounter a woman who is for some reason standing above a snowy street in Mayfair, which is which is a salubrious part of London. She's at the house of her employer, who is, although I didn't know this at the time, who is a somewhat remote and forbidding aristocrat. There has to be one of those, of course. But yeah, that's all I had at the beginning was that image. She was standing there, and I also the other thing that I did know as well was that she had, and this isn't a spoiler because again it's revealed very early on, that she had stitched a message into her own skin at enormous personal cost, obviously, because that is, and I did do the research here, it is a thing that's possible to do. But obviously she would have been in very great pain, and she would have had to have enormously important reasons for doing this. So that's all I had at the beginning, was that image. So the snow, the woman standing there having reached this extremely grave decision, and the act of falling. So the act of self-surrender. And another point, because these images aren't static necessarily, and Helen, you'll know this as well, right? So it's not a photographic image. It's a kind of nascent aesthetic. Right? It's all beginning to sound very black turtleneck now, but so a nascent aesthetic, right? And so that's what I had. And the other sense that I had was a sense of, and this is where the snow came in, because snow can be many things on the page and on the screen. It can obscure things. It can, but in this case, there was a sense to me of gentleness, of tenderness almost, in the way that she is enveloped by the snow in the act of falling. That's literally all I began with, was that image. And then what you have to do, as you know, is you have to find a way. You have to assemble a set of reasons, a set of circumstances to to bring that particular tableau into being. And having done that, you have to do all the plumbing that's necessary to get to the end. And very often that's an end you don't even know about yet. Certainly didn't in my case.
That's really lovely. You know, I one of my one of my great hatreds of people giving prescriptive writing advice on the internet, or indeed anywhere. and saying this is how you should do it. I've never met anyone really who writes like people tell you you should do, you know, like the whole plan thing, the whole like, no, you know. So that's really reassuring. And always reminds me too of, you know, I grew up wanting to be a painter, and the process of kind of creating a character, the way you talk about that, and the plot sort of appearing and realizing that sense, you know, when you're painting, there's a conversation between you and the materials and the canvas, and it's a constant state of sort of retrenchment and renewal, and the conversation is really, really interesting. And I think it sounds like that's the way that you piece together the book as
you're navigating the terrain, and I think because and I'm going to be reading a passage from your own book from Vesper Flights. Vesper, oh my God, did I just fluff your title? That's unforgivable.
I love it. More of that.
Vesper Flights.
Vesper Flights.
Vesper Flights. Well, there's the sequel. But yeah, because I think, you know, another thing that we have in common is that, you know, not just at the conception stage, but at the execution stage, I think we're both highly visual, and I will return to some examples of that in your work. But yeah, and that is, I think, an artifact of that part of the process, which is that you're certainly not, exactly as you say, you're certainly not following some predetermined schema. I mean, maybe that works for some writers, and you know, this is not a value judgment at all, but I can't imagine doing that. Just navigating a kind of aesthetic and psychic terrain that you have very dimly mapped out, but only very dimly.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of genre, Park, I mean, I know. I'm sorry about the genre thing. You know, as we were
No,
talking,
don't be sorry. I think it's a really rich seam of conversation. But
I know.
Go on.
I know.
Sorry, what were we going to say?
Well, I thought about it. You know, so I actually came up with like a meme for us to discuss, because, you know, obviously, you know, I thought it's mystery, but it's also
memes we do. Yeah.
It's kind of gothic. Okay. So I decided to like do this, and this, I don't know if it's backwards.
It's gonna be good.
We have.
That's superb.
Basically, this is kind of my conclusions as, you know, my research into the Gothic.
It is
so
superb.
I'm happy to say your book is Gothic according to this schema. You know, it's supernatural, it's dark, it's got some properly sublime moments. But
have you tweeted that yet, Helen? You have tweeted that. Oh, that's so tweet-worthy. It's one of the best uses of that meme that I've ever seen.
Bless you. So basically, I just wanted to kind of ask you about, like, when you know, when I write, I can't read anything. I can't read any other. I can't read Shakespeare because you can't copy Shakespeare. It's impossible. Basically, I have to just go on a book ban. I just chameleon and suck stuff up, and my prose changes according to who I'm reading, and I have to just actually I can read Agatha Christie. That's okay too. So Shakespeare and Agatha Christie I can do. And I kind of wondered, I didn't want to ask you about influences because that seems like a really lame question, but I wanted to ask, you know, do you read when you write?
No, I'm like you in that way too. I have a very, very limited repertoire of books that I can read. So you mentioned Shakespeare and Christie. I can read Lee Child because I can.
Oh yeah, and Lee Child, obviously. That
yeah, I can read Lee Child, and I can read. Let me see. And I can read the Aubrey Maturin series. I can read Patrick O'Brien. That's kind of it. You would think that's a risky choice because that is a style that you could find yourself easily slipping into as well. But for some reason, I'm insulated from that just by long exposure. I don't try to imitate either of those writers, so I can read those and I can watch old Morse episodes, which I think is something that we have in common too. But I can't really read much when I'm writing, and I also can't listen to music as I'm writing because you know, there's, as you say, you're always concerned with. I mean, it's not that you're concerned with keeping yourself pure or that you have any kind of precious notions about the sanctity of your own inner processes. It's not like that at all. It's just that, you know, I'm very flighty and I have almost no attention span, and you know, I'm trying to preserve what little capability I have and then focus it on the task at hand. But yeah, no, I'm very like that. I'm very like that. I have to be very selective about my
No,
stimuli.
it's really good to know. I mean, that was quite a selfish question to be asking, actually. I apologize to everyone listening who was like, why are we hearing this? And it's like,
Are we caring about this now?
Yeah. Not the only one. I'm going to go on and quote you something that you wrote about historical fiction in a really lovely kind of survey.
God, really?
Article. I'm sorry, but it's a great quote, and I'm going to ask you about it because I love it. And the quote is, "It's a truism that historical fiction reveals more about its own age than the one it portrays. We can't escape or even perceive our own biases," the reasoning goes. "So we end up helplessly projecting them onto a past where they don't belong. But the past is not a museum, and contemporary perspectives don't necessarily distort historical subjects." So we're obviously doing this talk the day before a quite significant inauguration. I'm remembering being in a parking lot in a hotel in Chile, weeping 4 years ago, chain smoking cigarettes. And I kind of wanted to just ask you about this book. It seems to be a very political book in ways that are they're not always overt, but they are huge. And I really kind of wanted to ask you about whether that was not uppermost, but whether it was part of the cause of this book.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know if I said it later in the piece that you just quoted from, but I said it somewhere in a similar piece that first of all, to the point about contemporary perspectives on historical subjects, I think I raised the example of Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad in that context, because it seemed to me a highly relevant example, because what he does in that book, obviously approaching a subject of the utmost historical importance, and obviously very, very deeply researched, and he presents documentary ephemera of slavery, and these are really, really grim things to read. That they're like the bills of sale and things like that that are really distressing just to confront on the page. And he juxtaposes those with dystopian imaginings of his own, and very often the two are indistinguishable. That in other words, that there's almost no horror that would have been unimaginable, or that seems implausible in that setting. And that to me seems to support the contention that truthfulness and historical accuracy or verisimilitude are not the same thing. That there are that you can do a lot with. It's not to say that you don't have to do any research. Of course you do research, and I did all of that, and I had these. There's a wonderful, by the way, and this we did warn people that there would be digressions, or at least we did online in advance of this thing, and this is going to be one of those digressions, I'm afraid. So one of the things that I did rely on massively was that the National Library of Scotland has done the world a great service by digitizing and making available as a Google overlay an 1885 Ordnance Survey street plan of London, which I basically immersed myself in for 2 years. Because first of all, the level of detail is fantastic. You can see where individual urinals are placed at individual street corners, which is, fascinating in its own way. At a slightly more important level, you can ensure that the street that you're referring to actually existed at the time, because this was a time of massive upheaval at many levels. And so there was a lot of the built landscape of London changing enormously at that time. So you can do all of that. But at the same time, you are not just producing a documentary artifact of a historical period. Obviously, that's not the work of historical fiction. You are, and I am, by the way, I haven't forgotten your question. I am I am very, very circuitously going back around to it.
I actually made a note because I have a very bad short-term memory. I'm like, so please.
Yeah. So what I was going to say eventually was that, yes, So having said that, I don't do any kind of planning, and certainly I don't sit down with any sort of didactic impulse to instruct people, because that would be horrible, right? And readers would detect that immediately, and it's a dreadful thing to be doing. It's not what fiction should be involved in at all. But having said that, you talked about the days before the Trump inauguration, that the origins of the book were a little bit further back than that. They were more around the time of the build up to the Brexit referendum and all of the awfulness that went around that. And I just remember to myself, I mean, this was more in the context of the Tory government in the UK at the time. I remember thinking to myself, and their disregard for, I mean, their generalized disregard for humanity and for the shared duty to take care of each other, which seems to me to be um, a substrate that we need to agree must exist in our societies. That duty of mutual care is something that seems to me to be indispensable and was disintegrating under this government. And the way I remember vocalizing it to myself one day, and I don't often have these high-minded internal narratives, but I do distinctly remember um, saying to myself one day that they are literally, not literally, I was misusing the word literally in what I've become aware. They are devouring people's souls. That's what they're doing. They're devouring people's souls. And that notion kept recurring alongside the sort of aesthetic stuff that I mentioned earlier. And it did occur to me, it must have occurred to me at a certain point that in the Victorian, these were notions that were taken entirely seriously. The notion, and were very, very, very much live issues. There was a whole sort of democratization of the afterlife that took place, and which is very much part of the book as well. There was, for many centuries before that, your remains had to be stowed under Westminster Abbey for you to have any kind of afterlife, for you to be remembered, right? And there was this democratization of the afterlife that took place in the Victorian, where it was an artifact of social mobility, right? Because you had more people of means who felt deserving of commemoration, and you had um, uh, what we now think of as funeral traditions, which arose in the Victorian, and you had the invention of the crematorium, for example. I think one of the first in Europe. It was built in Woking, I think, around 1884, thereabouts.
The
Yeah,
cemetery and the giant cemeteries out there,
yeah.
special trains that took bodies out of London. I mean,
Right.
it's extraordinary, yeah.
Because death was so ubiquitous, right? And it was always proximate as well. So all of that was going on. Then you had spiritualism, and that was the other process, democratizing process that I was going to mention, because you had the we all think of, when we think of spiritualism and seances and so on, we all think of the hokey stuff we see in more in film than on the page, the table knocking and so on. And it's always it's always a faintly hilarious sort of parlor game. But there was a lot going on politically, because it was a very it was very much, it can't be overstated how significant it was for women to be able to occupy that position, and not just women, but any woman could occupy that position of the medium, of the interlocutor, and the fact that a woman could sit in respectable drawing rooms and command an audience, whatever the circumstances behind that, whatever the pretext for it was immensely significant. And so it often strikes me that the medium appears to surrender her own voice, right? But what she is really doing is uh, her own voice is acquiring authority, and all of those are going on in the book. And so this is, I don't know how long I've been speaking for. I suspect it's decades, but I think this is finally the answer to your question. All of those highly political currents are going on and were going on
Yeah.
in the writing of the book.
That's a really sort of thought-provoking. I mean, I grew up, as anyone who's read Vesper Plights, which I'm now going to call it. No,
never getting away from that.
I love it. No, that's just glorious. I grew up in a very peculiar place. I grew up as a sort of small child running around this ruined country estate owned by the Theosophical Society. So, you know, all my neighbors were elderly ladies from good families who spent a lot of time in India, and we're all.
I love that essay in the collection. Yeah,
right. They were all into very esoteric practices, and there were all sorts of dark things going on, and so and then I got really interested a few years ago in that sort of blossoming of spiritualism following the First War. I mean, again, you know, time of crisis, you know. There's the sort of the irrational, the supernatural becomes an incredibly important strand in society. That was a very simplistic way to think about it. But then, of course, we have 2008 and the crash. And, you know, I just think of all these QAnon conspiracy theories, and, you know, people I, you know, vaguely knew on Facebook as being, you know, again, my assumptions are great, but they were like kind of really logical people, got really, really caught up in this rabbit hole. And this whole thing of, like, you know, and again, there's a thread in your book that chimes with it of sort of, you know, children being preyed upon to sate the sort of desires of the elite for eternal life. I mean, it's so obviously a repurposed anti-Semitic blood libel thing, and that goes back to like the 12th century, you know. So I guess I'm sort of thinking from that, like the idea of how, you know, the idea of the innocent, the idea of the child or the innocent woman preyed upon by the powerful has become this kind of the way that inflammatory power works is used for hate. And I just feel that really is a part of your book that chimes frighteningly with this stuff that's going on now. I wondered if you had any that.
Yeah. There's a lot, so much in what you've said, and yes, and one of the reasons why one despairs so much of phenomena like the QAnon movement you mentioned, I think, is because it is a response to momentous events that is fundamentally self-obsessed and incurious. In other words, it assumes the people who are and I realize that I run the risk of unacceptable generalization here, but it seems to me that many of the people who are drawn to those conspiracy theories are centering themselves in, you know, as well as rehabilitating some very ancient and repellent tropes, they are also centering themselves in the narrative in a way that feels undeserved to me, because they're using the imagery of predation upon children in order simply to present this cartoon of alleged evil that licenses an entirely unconnected set of behaviors, and these are all self-centering behaviors. This airing of entirely fanciful grievances, for the most part, and we saw this last week, you know, in the demographics of the kind of people who were flocking to the Capitol.
Yes, all those private jets that
in their private jets.
Yeah.
And the idea that there is any legitimate grievance at the basis of this is, I mean, obviously, many people across, you know, many people are economically disadvantaged, and this is not culturally specific, or, well, that there are disproportionate
we're talking about white people here, Paraic.
we are, and I'm skirting. I'm trying to find ways to circumlocute.
No, we can't circumvent this. This is really important.
It is, but yeah, it's just a massive misuse of what is it? There is a genuine injustice. You know, the vulnerable are being preyed upon, and these people are doing fuck all about it. Sorry, we did warn that there might be swearing.
It's all
They,
right. I'll
they,
swear later to kind of even
yeah,
out.
they're just using it as set dressing for this, for this. What it seems to me is massively unreflecting and self-centered view of the world.
Yeah.
And you know, but whereas it seems to me that and this is a thing that I want to come back to, and I want to read a passage from Vesper Flights in a moment to tie these things together. It seems to me that whether it's in writing about nature and the fascinating complexity of nature, or whether it's in writing about the important um, um, uh, whether it's political events of the day, or as is happening now, we have a pandemic, which is the intersection of the two, because you're having um, um, a pathogen that has jumped species as a result of our predation of the environment and our behavior as a population, and you have that crossing over. So that is a scientific phenomenon. That's an evolutionary phenomenon. It's a phenomenon. It is an artifact of our disastrous custodianship of the natural world, and it's also something that's becoming a political issue. Whatever it is, it's momentous, and it seems to me that the appropriate response to all of that is a response that originates in curiosity and humility, and that's what I love about your writing. And in fact, I'm going to segue at this point into a brief reading from your introduction. And the reason why I wanted to was partly because it's highly relevant, and partly because it meant a lot to me, because I got this proof in the middle of last summer at a time when I was very unwell and I almost couldn't read at all. And this made me sort of shamble to my feet and do my best impression of standing to attention. So this is Helen from the introduction to Vesper Flights, talking about what it is that animates her work. Most of all, I hope my work is about a thing that seems to me of the deepest possible importance in our present day historical moment: finding ways to recognize and love difference, the attempt to see through eyes that are not your own, to understand that your way of looking at the world is not the only one, to think what it might mean to love those that are not like you, to rejoice in the complexity of things. And that's what I mean. And that, as as an animating force, even though these are very different examples. These two books are very different examples. Vesper Flights and Vesper Sands are very different examples and in different forms. I think they are similar in that they share starting points. They share a position of humility and a position um, of of I mean, I do think love is the right word, and that's why I was so drawn to that passage.
I
For
think so.
you,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, that's what I mean, the people sort of often have sort of said, oh, your subject's death. And I'm like, well, it's kind of the same thing, really. I mean, I like to think it's love, really. It's a
yeah,
better option to write about. But like, love and death, one comes from the other. That there's, loving stuff is, there's a particular kind of love that springs from recognition of our how small our lives are, and that seems to me, very on point, particularly now, looking at what's all around us. And I'll
and
just keep.
sorry, Helga.
No, I mean, I'm not a polemical writer. I'm not very good
No,
at people. I'm the kind of person, if you tell me to do something, I'll do the opposite. I'm very contrary. Ask my mother if you ever meet her. But I like to think that I can sing about what's out there and say, look at this,
yeah.
look how astonishing this is, and that's, I mean, it's a truism to say that you're not going to fight to protect or save anything that you don't know and or love, that's how we do it. So It's like a little.
And unfortunately, you've been influential in that. I think. I mean, I can't account for all the reasons why people have responded to your work, but many people have, and I like to think that that is part of it, that they are drawn to that animating force. And you know what? Here we get to. I thought of a segue between this and Christopher Nolan.
We did Christopher Nolan. We promised we can talk about Christopher Nolan. This was going to happen. I was going to do it through food because I found this. Sorry, I will get back to you, but I'm so excited. I found this article called "The Best Parts of Christopher Nolan Movies Are All the Dainty Snacks and Drinks." The man loves himself a nice tea time, and it was all about like basically how Dunkirk, for example, is basically, you know, young men who can't have tea and toast fighting a war they don't want to be because they want tea and toast when they come home, and all the little cafes and the espresso cups, and it was great. So there was going to be a segue into food, but this sounds better. So please.
Well, I know that sounds well worth pursuing. But what I was going to say was, and by the way, this is where we should confess that we have yet another weird shared obsession, which is, you know, not entirely uncritical, but an obsession with the oeuvre of Christopher Nolan. And one of the things I do periodically, it's not so much the earlier stuff, not the Batman.
It's Interstellar. It's Interstellar.
It's Interstellar and
it's a particular scene in Interstellar.
Yes, yes, and Helen and I we sort of WhatsApp each other when we're watching this scene because we don't know why we do it to ourselves. So we're talking about the scene in Interstellar where Matthew McConaughey's character is taking leave of his young daughter. The scene in the where she's angry with him. She's obviously terribly upset, and she's at once clinging to him and turning him away. And
he's going to save the world. I mean, it's not like they're just.
And meanwhile, he is the future him. And I'm afraid we have to just go ahead and do the spoilers here. If you haven't seen it at this point, then you should have. Meanwhile, the future. What's his character's name again, Helen? Yeah, here. Cooper.
Cooper, yeah.
The future Cooper is in four-dimensional space constructed by future humans, a tesseract, where he is able to exploit gravity to send signals to his past self and to his daughter.
It's very Nolan. It's
very, very Nolan. But what I love about this, and this is the point again that I was eventually coming to, is that I think that was possibly his most successful metaphor, and it's what the passage that I've just read reminded me of. It's love as gravity, right? Or gravity as love. Because the metaphor that Nolan is exploiting in that film is that love resembles gravity, in that gravity in the current model is the only force that can transgress the limits of time. In other words, it can operate as if time were a dimension like length or height or width, right? So that's the cool thing about gravity. But the point that he's making is that love is like that too, and that is effect that I think it's a really closely analogous effect, if I may, to the one that you're describing, and I think we're seeing it in action in that that motivation of yours to write as faithfully and as curiously as you can about all of this beautiful complexity is an act of love, and I think it's an act of love that is acting with that force of gravity across time.
Wow, I'm a bit speechless. I mean, with it's wrapped around the words in your work too, obviously, and we just have to keep banging away at it. The scene in that film, this is not about books, is it? But the scene in the film that gets me also is that there's a bit where the gravity has tugged an autonomous drone out of its track. And it's being pulled down towards this weird anomaly. And Cooper and his family chase after it, and he wants to cannibalize this thing and turn it into to run his farm. And he's disassembling it. And the young girl Murphy says, "You know what? Can't we just let it go? It wasn't doing anyone any harm." And this is the point where I fall apart. I mean, I'm just bawling. So yeah, if you want to cry, it's a great movie to watch.
Yes. Yes.
I'm going to ask,
therapeutic.
we're sort of getting on now, and I want to ask you a very silly question. I wrote it down because I wasn't really sure. Oh, yeah. It's about myth making and being a writer. This is a really self-indulgent question because I know it springs from a recent review of your book where you were described as an Oscar Wilde gone tipsy.
By a publication that shall remain nameless.
Shall remain nameless. So I'm known as the bird. What was that? Did you say what?
Washington Post.
I didn't hear that. So I'm known as the bird lady, obviously, and when people have read H's for Hawke and they meet me, they're often quite freaked out because I'm not really, really miserable, and I smile and don't know what to do. They expect me to be, destroyed by grief. It's like, that was then. But then actually, I quite like this notion that I'm this totally solitary. Well, I am, I suppose, and I do live with a bird.
Well, we all are now.
But yeah, this notion that I live in the middle of nowhere and I spend my days dismembering rabbits and thinking about the meaning of life, I kind of love this. So I really wanted to ask you, if you could craft yourself a legend, like a sort of John le Carré legend of yourself as in the future of this creation, this author, what would he be like?
I think I would be like the persona that I sort of constructed on Twitter, and as you will know, I've never changed my Twitter avatar for all these years. I use, for the benefit of those who aren't on Twitter, you're probably better off, by the way. My avatar on Twitter is a detail from the Arnold Feeney wedding by Van Eyck. So the very, very pale dude with the ridiculously large hat.
It's a huge hat. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a really, really capacious hat. He could have anything up there. He could have a squirrel. He could have
small pig.
Small pig, time travel device. You never know. And he has he's great cheekbones. Whatever else you might say about him, and a very, very patrician disposition or demeanor rather. But but he also looks fundamentally ridiculous, and that's what sort of drew me to him. So, and I think it's a kind of it's a combination of that and the persona that I project, obviously humorously when cocktail hour begins on Friday evenings, and I sort of pretend to be sashaying around the house.
So we're talking sort of velvet smoking jacket.
Velvet smoking jacket or raw silk kimono.
Kimono would be great.
Yeah. Pearl-tipped cigarette holders.
This does sound quite Oscar Wilde work.
It does a bit. So maybe I invited that a little bit. But yeah, I mean, you could do worse than that description. But I do take issue with it on certain levels. But look, we don't have to go there.
No. My favorite ever review of my book was S is for shit, and that was on Amazon. So that's my little. No, I love it. I carry it around with me, almost like in a matchbox in my brain. And sort of look at it occasionally and snicker. It's so great. Sorry, that wasn't about persona, but I just thought that's kind of always part of me when I think of myself as a writer. That one.
Well, again, proceeding from a position of humility, I think those are important components to internalize, even though he was an asshole, and I'm assuming it was a he.
I've no idea. It was. I can't remember. I just remember the review. See, this is it. I've erased the reviewer. What was there was something else I was going to ask you. I think it was about Orwell. I remember years ago I went up to Scotland and I went on a boat across the Sound to Jura, across the Corryvreckan whirlpool. It was this extraordinary thing. I mean, it's on a high tide. Many people don't know about this. We don't have many exciting things in Britain, but British Isles. But the Corryvreckan is one. It becomes this huge whirlpool on a high night in a storm. But even on a very calm day, there's a kind of standing wave just sitting there. It's about 3 or 4 feet high, and there are these kind of patches of sort of completely flat water. It was very eerie. So we crossed. This has got nothing to do with what I'm talking about, of course. I'm just doing a bit of colour. So you crossed the Corryvreckan, and we came up to the shores of Jura, and the person was with pointed out George Orwell's house, which is this sort of white farmhouse in, you know, just bog and cotton grass and
Yeah.
brambles and not brambles and bracken, and everything's kind of grey and brown. It was really, really bleak and kind of wild in that way that, you know, wild people, it's not how it should have looked, but it looked pretty barren and very remote. And I thought, my God, he wrote 1984 in that house.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of wondered a little bit about how being in that house shaped that book as a political fable or as a novel. So I guess I wanted to ask you, with all that completely pointless information about Scotland and my little holiday,
None of that was
where you
pointless. That
write,
was all priceless.
where you write, and how where you write might affect.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, you know, it's also remarkably opposite. Now that I know what the question is,
I should have
because
ended with that. Sorry.
yeah, no. It's good. It was good not to know. It kept me on edge. Where I write most, I mean, I write here, right in this little room, which is my sort of home office study, which I've kept studiedly free of things that people can take the piss out of on social media. So I've room rate proofed myself here. So it's partly here, but it's also partly in a house that it's not actually mine. I don't have a second home, but my parents do, and so I use a house in Wexford that my parents have, and which is, it's certainly not quite as remote as that. I mean, it's not Jura level remote, but it is very, very quiet. And one of the things that I love about it is, first of all, that when I go down there, I have the entire drive down there to think, which is, you know, and just it's become a ritual. Like so that drive down the M11, it's a short drive. That's about 80 kilometers, so about 50 miles or so. And during that drive, I get to sort of ruminate and you know, to the point that I have any kind of coherent process. That's the process, and then I get down there and I just type. But it has that quality of isolation, and you can see the stars as well. So you can step outside for a smoke and you can see the stars properly. And yeah, that's the closest I can get to the Orwell Jura myth. But yes, it is part of it, and it does inform the aesthetic. And I see that Louisa has joined us again, which I take it means that we've gone over time.
I was going to do questions, but I don't have any questions. But I think, I mean, I've had a lot of fun. I do all my writing in cafes, or did before pandemic. So what was great, just quickly to say, when I wrote Hawk, I wrote it in a local cafe in the town Newmarket, which is the sort of home of the British horse racing industry, really. And of course, Newmarket, it was just, you know, I had this kind of gang of pensioners that used to hang out with me, and they thought I was hilarious, like, who's this weirdo, you know? And then when the book did well, they were just delighted, and they you know, they bought me hazelnut lattes and stuff like that. And there was a competition to, if anyone brought, it was actually a Costa cafe. And so when the book won this Costa award, Costa decided they were going to do this thing that if anyone brought a book into the cafe, they'd get like a free coffee and a cake, right? And I was like, that's not going to work. It's Newmarket. Anyway, so apparently they did this thing and no one came in. You know, no one reads anything in Newmarket apart from the Racing Post, which is the kind of, you know, the racing newspaper. So I just love that entire book was written in the corner of a cafe in a town where literally everyone is talking about nothing but horses. It just makes me
wonderful. I didn't know that. And you get to take advantage of that offer too, though, right? I mean, I know you're not living around there anymore, but can you bring a copy of your own book into that Costa and get?
Well,
get
only for one day. I'm afraid. I think they just gave the cakes out in the end. It wasn't a good promotion for them. But everyone was like, "Oh no, we like the cakes, thank you." But no, I missed that place. I shall have to go back. You know, I sometimes even play that kind of, you know, play the YouTube thing of the cafe noises in the background when I'm working. I'm that sad. I miss.
Well, Louisa is desperately looking for,
okay,
for an end here to make us stop.
Stop talking. It's been really fun.
It has been fascinating. I love how your minds work and all the things that go behind. You know, we read these books and we love the worlds that you create in the books, but it is endlessly fascinating to hear all the paths that take you there, and not something that we would know otherwise. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
It's been wonderful.
A huge pleasure.
Thank you to everybody that joined us today. And if you want to support these wonderful authors and Book Passage, please contact us for a copy of The House of Vesper Sands or Vesper Flights. Thank you again so much. This has been absolutely delightful. Thank you for staying up late and being with us today. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.